Good afternoon, good evening, and other times. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to the Pocket Pushers podcast here on YouTube. Yes, we are still on YouTube. We have not left the confines of this website just yet, but I'm Andrew Pearson here with Harry Gollan. Today, folks, is September 22nd, year of our Lord 2023, and we've been absent from your computer screens over the past couple of weeks. Not exactly timely, as you've seen here. We're trying. It's early season for us too here, but we just wanted to take a little recap of the last 2 weeks. Football season has started, and it's an interesting one. It's the only week of the year where the information we had from the previous week is now doubled, which is great. And in the case of the Mariners and the Rangers, they've gone through quite the interesting time over these past 2 weeks or so. And we should really be talking about them, Harry.
I think so. And Andrew, it's obviously hard to start with football when it's not just that there's a playoff race. And it's not just that there's a playoff race with an unprecedented, or at least nearly unprecedented, 3-team race with 10 games left to go in the year. But it actually involves both of our teams, Andrew.
I know, it's really interesting. I don't know how to feel, if I'm being honest. It's the first time in about almost 10 years, at least nine or 8 for the Rangers at least, that they've been playing meaningful games this late into the season. It's just not a regular occurrence for this team. And on top of that, I haven't been alive for most of the playoff runs. So this is a very unique feeling. It's also really unique for all 3 of the teams in this race because all 3 of these teams are incredibly streaky.
I mean, that's absolutely the case, Andrew. But I think what's important to recognize right off the bat here is that 3 teams really complicates things. And for me, at least, Andrew, I actually feel like this is the lowest stress playoff race. And the Mariners have been in it late. But the thing about it is that I'm not really worried about it, right? Because you know that thing where your team limps into the playoffs and you just know they're going to get killed, but no one can win, so you just get to, sneak in and get smashed?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
That's not going to happen. The team, especially the Mariners, who play Rangers, Astros, Rangers to close the year, they're either going to play their way into the playoffs or they're going to play their way out. You know what I mean? Either they've proven they can beat 2 playoff caliber teams or they haven't. And having that much control over your destiny, at least to me, that's great because I hate scoreboard watching. I hate it when my team wins and it doesn't mean anything because Houston manages to crush the Tigers or whatever, you know?
And also, none of it might even matter because the Blue Jays might just blow it against the Rays and the Yankees.
True. Good Lord willing.
Lord willing.
I'm very anti-Blue Jays. I know that's... I remember, Andrew, I don't know how much you may have remembered about this because it was very much a product, I think, of pre-pandemic hype, but there was a lot of hype around the Blue Jays. It's like, oh, they've got Vladdy, they've got Bo Bichette, they've got all these guys, right? And they're so fun and young. I've just always hated them. I can't really explain why. I think it's because Blue Jays fans come down every time they play the Mariners in Seattle and flood the stadium unless the Mariners are really good. But, I just don't want to see them succeed. And it gave me so much joy to see them have their hearts ripped out by the Mariners last year,
I vividly remember that 8-1 comeback.
Because people were, texting me, my friends from college texting me, to make fun of me. And, of course, our good friend Thomas, who's a very passionate Mariners fan, had some choice words for the team when they went down that to that degree.
Yeah, but even with that magical comeback from last year, I would say as a Rangers fan who's been having to deal with Blue Jays just sniffing us out of the playoffs every time we seem to make it, listen, I like the Blue Jays colors. I think it's a cool team. It's kind of cool that they're from Canada, but you want to talk about an annoying fan base that is so convinced, in a very Cowboys-esque way, that every year seems to be their year, and they keep blowing it. They keep blowing it, and they've been in denial about it the entire year.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, when you think of the Cowboys of baseball, you usually think the Yankees, but you're right that there's a sneaky undercurrent of the Blue Jays have really, and I do feel for them in the sense that, like, personally the best Canadian team was always the Expos, better colors, much more likable. But I will say that there's been this undercurrent for years that they've been trying to win. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of people, like, you remember that much mocked quote where Vladdy said, I think in 2020, in the lead into the 2022 season, last year was the trailer, this year's the movie, and then they got swept out of the wild card by the Mariners.
That's very funny. That's so funny.
Even that's a little misleading, because they signed Hyunjin Ryu when he was really good, coming off of a great stretch with the Dodgers. They traded for Jose Barrios. Those are 3-4 years ago. You know what I mean? This is the window for them. So I know what you're talking about that overconfidence and that belief that things will come around. But I feel like,
it's
unlike with the Yankees, right? I think unlike with the Yankees, no matter how bad they are, there's that sense of entitlement. Like, we're gonna win. We're the Yankees. I think there's actually a little bit more desperation in Toronto, where it's like, well, if not this year, then when? Because there's just not that much time left before you're going to have to start dishing out some real extensions. And some of those older pieces, Gossman's not exactly, in his early 20s. Barrios is up and down, you know what I mean? You don't feel fantastic about that.
And they're still trotting out George Springer out there, who's been fine.
Oh,
but
I mean, he's been heating up lately, but he's also not that young, and he's injury prone. And, I mean, if you look at the division, boy, with the Orioles sitting there, you're not going to win the war of attrition here. You need to be better than them in the next couple years here. And I don't really see that happening.
More like next year.
I don't know their exact contract situation in terms of how many guys they've got coming into arbitration and all that, but, I mean, it is a tight time schedule, and clearly the Orioles have the advantage in the long run. Even if the Angelos family will just refuse to ever extend any player. So that's an interesting policy. We'll see how it works out for them, but I'm skeptical that will be beneficial in the long run for the Orioles. But I don't think the Blue Jays can afford to think in the long run. And that, I think, does set apart the Mariners from every other team in this sort of like 4-team race, 3 for the AL West, and then the Blue Jays for the wild card. Is they're the only team who I don't think are on like the middle of their competitive window. They're the only one who are still pretty early on in it. You know what I mean?
Well, I'd argue the Rangers are actually relatively early on. I would say.
How old is Marcus Semien?
Listen, man. I think he turns 35 years young next year.
Spring chicken.
Spring chicken, this one. But Corey Seager's going to turn 30 next year.
Right.
But the real promising thing is all the prospects that are coming up.
True.
From the farm system right now. To close out the year, Jack Leiter had a fantastic four outings in September. They brought him up to AAA. I'm glad they didn't ruin him. Yeah, he's not ruined yet. He actually had a fantastic last 4 games in AA Frisco, and they brought him back up to AAA. And they'll probably give him one more start just because the AAA season runs 1 week longer than the AA season. So that's most likely what it's about. He'll probably start in AA again next year, unless he has a really great spring training. But he had a really great closing out to the year. Showed a lot of improvement this year after some really bumpy starts. But the real guys who are worth noting, Evan Carter, who's come up in the last 2 weeks.
That's right.
Started that Oakland series 2 weeks ago, and he's been fantastic. He's got an OPS over 1,000 in these last 3 weeks. He's got 2 homers, 2 steals, a batting average over 300. I think he's hitting 334 if I recall correctly. Coming into today's game against the Mariners, he's been fantastic, and he's been the 9-hole hitter over these last 2 weeks. Thanks Bochy for putting this guy as the 9-hole hitter, but he's been fantastic since coming up. And then you got Wyatt Langford, who has been hitting 400 in every single level of the minor league system that he's been asked to play at, from rookie ball, low A, high A. He was drafted this year, and he's already in Triple A. And he has worked his way through every single one of the systems in about, 3 months? He's incredible. Wyatt Langford's
I'm gonna be a bit of a jerk, alright? Warning. How many pitchers have they developed in the last 5 years?
We might get one. We might get one. Do you understand me? They developed Cody Bradford, and they developed Cole Reagans, who is no longer on the team because they traded him.
Okay, that doesn't count because he wasn't good until he left. But yes, you have that great point about... I think it's unfair to the Rangers to say that their window is... Like, the Astros, I don't want to say they're at the closing end of their window, but they're definitely not at the beginning of it. Certainly the Blue Jays are sort of in that middle-late period. The Rangers are kind of hard to place because if you really believe in the kids and you think that they can find decent pitching, the window's just starting. But if you believe that they're kind of getting carried by Corey Seager becoming the best player in baseball over a limited sample and Marcus Semien, then you probably are going to be a little worried about where they're going to be long term.
I would agree, and this is a point I've heard several times already, but I'll bring it up again. The Rangers are a very unique team in the way that they team built this particular playoff caliber team, in that they really built backwards. They
did.
Very traditionally, with any sport, you normally sell off all your old pieces of any value. You accept the fact that you're going to suck for a couple of years, and you get a young nucleus to build around with a couple of star players, typically from the draft, that you build around. And by the time those young players are becoming young superstars is when you bring in all the veterans to supplement that and create a really powerful team while those guys are still on their rookie contracts. And then as the window keeps going on, you lose some of those old vet guys as your young superstars become the vets. And that's just how the cycle keeps going. But the Rangers are really unique in that they just went out and bought all the good players first. While they had a really crappy farm system, they came in 2 years ago and they said, all right, Semien and Seager are going to come in and anchor the lineup. And we're going to bring in John Gray to help out with the rotation. And it worked. It worked because Semien and Seager were still good, while the rest of the team was awful. But they kept bringing up young guys every year to supplement the Semien and Seager core. And now you have guys like Nathaniel Lowe, who is going into his arbitration year. You got guys like Adolis Garcia, who was an amazing waiver pickup, who has been one of the best power hitters in baseball. You got Josh Young. Josh Young, who's been really good. And by the way, both of those guys are back off of injuries, which we'll talk about here in a second. But
yeah,
you got him. You, of course, had Ezekiel Duran and Leody Taveras. Duran was one of the key pieces from the Joey Gallo trade, who has been working out. Will most likely be a trade piece coming up for next year. And then you got guys like Evan Carter and Wyatt Langford, who are the superstars who are clearly the guys. And then you got Sebastian Walcott this year, who is a young international free agent, 17 years old. But I think he's already in high A. He already made it out of rookie ball. So it's a lot of exciting young pieces coming up through the system while the core is gaining chemistry together, which is a very weird way to build your team. But it appears to be working because they're clearly ahead of schedule.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth mentioning that this used to be much more common in sort of a pre-rebuild, pre-analytics era where you'd kind of just, in like the 80s, and this is true of all sports, you'd kind of just try and sign some big players and figure out on the fly how to make it work. And as team construction has been more regularized, teams do more like what you said, what the Mariners have done, right? Tear it all down, get the young guys, and then start adding to it. Now, the Mariners have been slow to add veterans, and they probably should have added some of the veterans that the Rangers added. But, in the end, the process has come to one and the same. Now, I think what's interesting here is, at least to me, looking forward to the 3-game series that is starting here today. The day we're recording that is September 22nd. It's going to be an interesting series because the Mariners, and you can talk about the Rangers pitchers who they're going to throw out here in just a second, but the Mariners pitchers are interesting because they all have... This is not, I will be blunt, the front end of our rotation. And so this is why it's kind of a big deal. The Mariners have the tiebreaker locked in over both the Astros and the Blue Jays. So the only team that has them on head-to-head would be the Rangers. So it does kind of matter. I mean, they have enough control of the Astros, but they play the Rangers so much they still need to play reasonably well against them. But for this 3-game series, Game 1, it's Bryce Miller versus Dane Dunning. And Bryce Miller had an excellent start to his career, just dominant. Except for one start in Texas, where the Rangers, sort of at the peak of were the best team in baseball before we decided to become a 500 team.
Yeah.
In the middle of summer. At the peak of their powers, they just crushed him. You know what I mean? His whole thing is he has this fastball, a lot of backspin, very difficult to track. You know, he had that start against the Rays where he left with a blister in the 4th inning. That was actually one of the low points of the season, but he was pitching really well. And, you know, he threw like something ridiculous, like 70% fastballs. So that's who he is. And he's had a lot of success, slowed down a little bit. I think the innings have caught up to him a little bit sort of later in the year. But the team that really hung crooked numbers on him, especially sort of at the beginning of his time where he was, you know, fresh and putting up a historic run as a rookie, it was the only thing that could really do it, that could really get to him, was the Rangers. So it'll be interesting to see if he can, you know, kind of get back at them here when it really matters. What do you think about Dane Dunning?
I don't know. Dane is such a strange pitcher because he started the year off on fire out of the bullpen as the long relief guy. And as Jacob deGrom went down, he took his spot in the rotation, and he never really let it up. He had a string of about 6 really great starts after the deGrom injury. And then as the team decided they wanted to kamikaze their season, so too did Dane Dunning, who...
He's a team player.
Yes, he is. He puts the guys on it. He gives his team a chance to win every time he's on the mound, Harry. And he kind of became really hot and cold, like the team, once we got to about mid-August. He had a couple of really bad outings. Once they got Scherzer and Montgomery, he ended up being tossed back into the pen and has kind of been alternating between him and Andrew Heaney on who starts. But he had a really bad outing a couple of weeks ago against, I think it was it the Twins? I don't recall, but he had a really bad outing where he gave up 9 runs in 3 innings pitched. He had a really bad stretch, and then since then he's kind of been all right. He's been back to being all right. So, something that will be worth noting is which Rangers team shows up for this series and which Mariners team shows up for this series. Because are we going to get the Rangers that just hung up 15 on the Red Sox and embarrassed them in every single game? Or are we going to get the Rangers that are losing to the A's?
Or the Twins, for that matter. In humiliating fashion.
Don't friggin' remind me about that awful Twins series.
But you're absolutely right about the Mariners, where, honestly, it's felt like this year, it doesn't really matter who the opponent is. The Mariners can hit, and when they're hitting, they can hit good pitching. But when we're cold, we can't take advantage of bad pitching. You know what I mean? Like, there was early in the year, we had this game where we had to, we nearly lost to the A's for 2 consecutive games. It took an A.J. Pollock late game solo shot to tie it up so that we could win those games against the A's. So when the team is cold, they're cold, and it doesn't matter if it's Dane Dunning, prime Jacob deGrom. It doesn't matter who it is. They won't hit. On the other hand, they have gotten to some very good pitchers this year, so you're absolutely right about a lot of the variability here coming in being about where the lineups, respectively, are going to be.
For what
I will say one thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Which I was sort of comparing the profiles of Dane Dunning and Bryce Miller. And it's actually a very interesting comparison. Because to cut to the chase here, Dane Dunning, a lot of the analytics like Dane Dunning a little bit more than Bryce Miller. And what's interesting about this is that Bryce Miller is essentially better at everything as a pitcher, except for one huge statistic. So Bryce Miller strikes more guys out, he walks less guys, you know what I mean? They get barreled up about the same amount, they get hard hit about the same amount, you know what I mean? But there's one area which just crushes Bryce Miller and where, sort of advanced stats love Dane Dunning, and that is ground ball rate.
Oh, yeah.
Bryce Miller's is below average, Dane Dunning is a pitch to contact guy. So, what's interesting about this, and I think is something that's worth noting, is that you've definitely seen Bryce Miller's effectiveness decline, similar to what you saw, I think, with Logan Gilbert last year when he was still pretty young, where he's a younger guy, hasn't really gone through a full major league season, the velocity starts to dip, he can't go as deep into games, and he doesn't quite have that strikeout stuff every night. And it's about learning to adapt. And my question would basically be, can Bryce Miller be a Dane Dunning, a good Dane Dunning, in this game here? Because if he can and can manage contact, he will outpitch Dane Dunning. But that's an if, because Dane Dunning has been much better at generating that contact on the ground. So that's certainly something to watch out for.
And not only that, but he's doing it against the team that has killed him so far this year, which will be interesting to see. Now, the second starter, I believe, it looks like it's going to be Cody Bradford against Brian Wu.
It's not Montgomery?
Let's see here. Blah, 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 blah. I'm trying to see who is the respective starter right now.
I have it written down as Logan Gilbert versus Jordan Montgomery.
Because if
that's what that's what it is, I think, because it's both on MLB.com and on Lookout Landing.
Okay.
Gilbert v. Montgomery for Game 2. Game 3.
Lone Star Ball is slacking, dude. They haven't announced it.
That's why they don't deserve the playoff spot. They don't want it enough. Anyway, so yeah, but Logan Gilbert versus Jordan Montgomery.
So Gilbert versus Montgomery. Montgomery's been amazing, honestly, since coming to the Rangers. He's gone deep in every game. He's had strikeout stuff the entire time. Incredibly steady, reliable pitcher. I'd be shocked because he's supposed to be. He's at the end of his contract right now. I'd be shocked if the Rangers don't re-sign him because he is a good, relatively young pitcher who is very much suitable for the middle of the rotation, even a little bit at the top of the rotation. We're getting into 2021 John Gray territory here where the decent to really good pitcher is now your ace, while everyone else is kind of worryingly lagging behind. And a lot of that has been injuries, but for Montgomery specifically, he's been great so far. Completely trust him. He's been one of the best pitchers, one of the best pitchers in the AL, if I'm being honest, since he got traded. So I've got no issues with Montgomery. Now Gilbert, from what I heard, has been not sparkling as of late.
Well, here's what I'm going to say about Logan Gilbert, and this has been true of him all year. When he came into the league, he's kind of like Bryce Miller is now, but even worse. He had an above-average fastball and basically no other major league caliber offering. You know what I mean? And he got by purely on the fastball. This year, he's taken a step forward because he's just had stretches where he has his off-speed stuff, and all of a sudden he's a top tier. He's probably a top 10, maybe top 15 pitcher in the AL when he has his splitter, when he has his changeup, when he has his slider. And that's a bit of a conditional when there. It hasn't been a constant this year. So this game, I feel like, where the previous game is kind of a toss-up where like either Bryce Miller or Dane Dunning could pitch well, but they could also pitch okay, or they could just melt down, right? With Montgomery, I think you're getting a guy whose floor is clearly above Logan Gilbert's. But I do think that we're looking at Logan Gilbert, who threw, a complete game shutout earlier this year, and then followed that immediately up with a 7-game, with a 7-inning outing against the Astros. Like, the ceiling on Logan Gilbert is incredible. And the thing about Logan Gilbert's starts, Andrew, and you know this because we've gone to some games where he's pitched, you know from like the first inning, when he throws that first splitter, when he throws that first slider, and if a guy swings and misses, you're like, okay, it's time. And if it just is terrible, you're like, it's going to be a long game for the Mariners.
It really is interesting because Logan Gilbert, when he's on, is so good.
So good.
But, I don't know. When's his contract up? Because he's got probably another 2 years, right?
Yeah, I think even before arbitration, because this is just his third year of service time.
Gotcha, okay.
So, I mean, in this game, again, I feel like where the previous one, I'd actually say it's a toss-up. I don't know who I'd take over Bryce Miller or Dane Downing. I'm going to lean towards Bryce Miller because I think, again, the ceiling's a little higher, but This one I feel like it's all or nothing. Either the Mariners are just going to roll the Rangers here and Logan Gilbert looks fantastic, or they go down 4-0 in the first, 3 innings, and it's a slog from there where they have a much worse chance of winning. You know what I mean?
It really could be anything. It could be anything. Now, I do believe it should be Cody Bradford for...
It's saying Eovaldi for me.
But Eovaldi...
I've got Eovaldi, yeah.
Eovaldi pitched on
MLB.com confirms.
I see. Well, if it's Eovaldi pitching, I don't know how to feel about that right now. Eovaldi was the best pitcher in the AL until he got hurt. Was out for about a month or so with a forearm strain. Comes back to a incredibly desperate Rangers starting rotation 2 weeks ago. Can only go about two and a third innings for about a week. And a lot of that was because they couldn't afford to have him do a rehab start. He needed to produce immediately.
Yeah.
So he's been back. He hit 5 innings last time out. He's been okay.
Yeah.
But you can clearly tell he needed a couple rehab starts. He really should have.
Yeah.
They really should have tried to stretch him out in the minors. They didn't do that because they're desperate, and even now they're still desperate because we should have mentioned this earlier on in the show. But Max Scherzer, I believe, with a minor teres strain muscle in his right arm. He went out in the Blue Jays series, even after pitching really well, was because he had a minor tear in his throwing arm. So, nothing that requires surgery. He'll be fine for next year, but he's not coming back this year.
He's done.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
So, not serious, but serious enough that he's not going to be able to come back. So, Eovaldi, I don't know what to say. We could see the return of good Nathan Eovaldi now that he's had a string of about 3 or 4 starts now where he's been okay, and we'll see if he can still go deep into games. But we don't really know what brand of Nathan Eovaldi we're going to be getting, if I'm being honest.
It's funny you mention that, Andrew, because I feel like that's kind of similar to Brian Wu here, where the stats have not been quite... I mean, 3.9 ERA is not bad at all, especially for a guy's first year. But, again, kind of like Bryce Miller, it kind of seems like the workload's gotten to him. But there's a difference. Where Bryce Miller has had, I think, generally better results, Brian Wu has just been unbelievable in the peripheral statistics. By all accounts, he should be absolutely dominant. Now, he does struggle to go deeper into games. They've definitely been a lot more careful with his innings than even Bryce Miller's. So it's a little similar to that. And I feel like, again, it's a bit like the Eovaldi situation, where he's probably not going to go as deep as you would want him to, even if he's pitching well. And there is a pretty wide variance between the best and worst case scenario. You know what I mean? I feel like, when Luis Castillo goes out there on the mound, you're like, you're going to get at least 5 or 6 tough innings he's going to gut out. That is not the case with Brian Wu. And that's why I feel like, considering how streaky these teams have been, and considering how I'd honestly argue that pretty much every pitching matchup is kind of close. You know what I mean? I would have normally put Eovaldi over Wu pretty clearly, but coming back from injury, not necessarily going as deep into games, that's not a great, thing for the Rangers. I think it's going to be a lot of momentum. Both teams are coming off crushing inferior teams. Mariners swept the A's, and I think the Rangers, they just came off of Maybe the Red Sox?
Yeah, they won the series against the Red Sox, but they actually dominated their final game. Which
yeah, I mean, like,
know.
to be honest, sweeping the A's is like winning a series against a regular team. No offense to the A's, but also offense. Did you hear they gave Miguel Cabrera a bottle of wine as their gift for his retirement, even though he had gone into treatment for alcoholism?
No! You
Do
can't
your
do
research,
that.
bro.
Come on.
Oh, God. So that's embarrassing. Anyway, so yeah, both teams are coming in with some momentum. Both teams have had their sort of offensive explosions, and the Mariners are actually in a good spot in that their bullpen is relatively well rested. All the starters went deep. The benefit, I think any Mariners fan would probably prefer to have, Castillo and Kirby in this series. The benefit is we'll have those guys back for Houston, which could be a good opportunity to bury Houston since we have the tiebreaker on them. But also, it's just a rather significant thing because it means that we've been able to rest the bullpen. So yeah, we're not throwing out the front end of our rotation, but our bullpen's ready to go and better than the Rangers. So I think that's going to be a big thing is basically, can the Mariners get to the Rangers bullpen? You know what I mean? Because even if they can do it at the same rate the Rangers do, that's an advantage. You know what I mean? But they can't have their starters collapse.
Yeah, and I will say, in this last week, since we've talked about the Rangers bullpen, they have been better. They have been better, and the real standout here.
Better.
Yeah, better. But a lot of that is because they haven't been put in save situations. They've just been winning, so that is a benefit. But I will say, the one standout here from this bullpen has been Martin Perez, who has been spectacular in a long relief role. Now that Scherzer is down and they're not really sure if they want Cody Bradford to start or not, they're kind of talking about bringing Martin back into the starting rotation. Bruce Bochy talked about that last night, and
why not?
He's been great. And in his last outing, he probably won't be back for the Red Sox, or not the Red Sox series. They probably won't be back for this first Mariners series because the day before this, so Wednesday, I guess we're recording this on Friday, but Thursday was an off day. But the previous game against the Red Sox, after John Gray only went two and a third inning with 4 runs given up, Martin came in through 4 2/3 scoreless with 5 strikeouts and only 1 walk allowed. So he's been really great over these last few weeks out of the pen, and it wouldn't surprise me if he's able to anchor it even further if he comes back to the starting rotation, because he's still stretched out as a long relief guy. So I would look out for him in the bullpen. After that, everyone's been pretty rough. I think the wheels have completely come off of Will Smith. Will Smith is a problem at this point. He had a really nice first half of the year, but this is a much older player. He played for Bruce Bochy on those championship Giants teams, and this is just a really old reliever who is deep into the season. He's kind of wearing down a little bit. The stuff's not there, but he's still being trotted out late in games and being expected to close because the team just refuses to trust Aroldis Chapman in those roles. And so you're sitting here with the Rangers, and you see a team with no real closer. Aroldis Chapman is incredibly streaky, like the team, and Will Smith just cannot be trusted right now. And other than that, you don't have any other options as closing options, unless you want to throw Jonathan Hernandez out there.
Hernandez, that's how I was gonna say.
But
he can throw hard.
He can throw hard. He has the stuff. I will say
he doesn't know where it's going.
I will say that his last appearance on Wednesday, he struck out the side and only allowed 1 hit, with no walks and no runs given up. So a little bit better, I guess, but I don't know. This Rangers bullpen is still rough. It's still a rough bullpen. Yeah. We're getting late into the year now, and with two and a half starters really, because Nathan Eovaldi's only half recovered really. You have 2 starters gone, and they need to be replaced, and the replacements are a little mixed. So.
So Andrew, I think that we've talked about these rosters now. We've laid out our opinions on the pitching matchup here. So that brings us to the inevitable question: what is your prediction for this 3-game series?
I think the Rangers probably take it. I think they take it 2-1, and the reason I say that is because you're getting 2 opportunities. You're getting 2 cracks at the 2 streakiest, most vulnerable pitchers in the Mariners starting rotation. You're getting a shot at Bryce Miller, who you've dominated the entire year, and you're getting a shot at Brian Wu, who's been a little...
They also knocked him around.
Yeah, who's been a little mixed. But the real benefit here is that the lineup is finally coming back into form. Semien and Seager have been amazing all year, but Nathaniel Lowe is back to being competent. You have Jonah Heim, who is finally switch hitting again, and his wrist seems to be fully back, and he's been one of the best offensive catchers in the entire league.
Not better than Cal Raleigh, though.
No, he has better than Cal Raleigh.
No, he hasn't, but he's not as valuable.
Oh, that's...
Because you know what the best ability is?
I hate you.
Availability. Hate you. That's right. No, seriously, Cal is the best catcher in baseball by value. He is. He's a workhorse. He's top 3 in defense. He's top 3 in offense. There's really nobody who's done that and stayed healthy. Rutschman's up there too. Rutschman's number 2, I think. Heim might be 3rd. He might be a little further down now.
Well, I mean, he only missed about 2 weeks, and he's one of the best defensive catchers in the league.
But catchers rack up, value so just on a game-by-game basis. If you can hit as a catcher and you catch a lot of games, because Cal's caught a ton of games, right, with Murph getting hurt. So I think his numbers are... Just by catching a lot of games, he's a little ahead. On a rate basis, Heim might be a little better, but not valuable because the best ability is availability.
I hate you.
Now, Andrew, I'm going to go on the opposite end. I'm going to say Mariners sweep.
Mariners sweep?
No, I'm kidding. I'm not saying Mariners sweep. I'm saying 2-1 Mariners, and I'll tell you why. Here's the thing. I see essentially almost every game here as a coin flip in terms of the starting pitching matchup, right? Dunning versus Miller, coin flip. Gilbert versus Montgomery is a coin flip in whether the Mariners are going to find themselves in an extremely difficult situation or they're going to find themselves in a very winnable situation. And I go back to Wu and half of Nathan Eovaldi as a coin flip, right? So what do you do when you have a coin flip? Well, you look at the lineups and you look at the bullpen. The Rangers are a better hitting team than the Mariners, but when the Mariners are on, they're on, and they've looked good. Yeah, it was against Oakland, but I'm not too worried about the lineup. I think that they have it in them to score enough runs, especially because, I'm sorry, but when you're in a close series between 2 very good teams that's basically playoff baseball, the bullpen is going to matter the most. You know what I mean? This is why the Mariners were better than the Blue Jays in the playoffs and worse than the Astros. Bullpen. Which team has the better bullpen? Which team can afford to have a starter not be so great, or be good but inefficient, or just... feel like I don't love sending my guy out for a 3rd time through the lineup and it's a 2-run, 1-run ball game. Who has the luxury to pull back and without throwing in their ultimate high leverage guy, though the Rangers don't even have one of those really. Who has that ability to essentially make up for their starters, not quite picking up the slack they need to? It's the Mariners, especially with that bullpen coming in so well rested. So that's my case for why I think the Mariners are going to take it. I think it's 2-1, and I'm playing the probabilities here. I'm not even going to predict which games the Mariners will win. I just feel like you flip a coin, it's 50-50 who gets the better starting pitching performance, but the Mariners, I think, have the capacity to win with an inferior starting pitching performance, and I don't really think the Rangers do. That's my case.
I would argue that this lineup for the Rangers just gives them a higher floor than the Mariners because you have that dominant top 3 of Semien, Seager, and Lowe. Young and Garcia are back, and they've been hitting really well since they've come back. Not only that, but Leody Taveras has decided to finally start hitting again. Another really streaky player, but when he's on, he's on. And Evan Carter's been otherworldly. So, and I forgot to mention Hyman there as well. So that's the majority of the lineup that can all hit, similar to how it was at the start of the season. And you have a lot of really valuable guys that I think will provide a lot higher of a floor offensively. And when you have that higher floor against pitchers that you've knocked around all year, plus the youth and inexperience of Wu.
How much playoff experience does most of the Rangers lineup have? Less than the Mariners.
Well, because we bought all the rotation, they all came from actual better teams. So,
because here's what I'm saying here is basically I agree with you. The Rangers have a higher offensive floor, but in fairness, I don't think they've really knocked around the Mariners' high leverage guys that much because when they've beaten us, they've absolutely crushed us. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I see your point, but I'm just gonna say at the end of the day that offenses can go cold. Pitching's a little more reliable. And at the end of the day, in playoff baseball, Andrew, a good bet is the team with the better bullpen. And I don't think it's even a competition. Like, the Rangers and the Mariners offense, there's a clear imbalance. But the Rangers and the Mariners bullpen isn't a conversation.
No.
You know what I mean? And that's where I feel like, yeah, it's better to have, like, a really good offense. But I can just, like, see it now, right? The Rangers put up maybe 3-4 against the Mariners starter. Bullpen comes in and holds that down. And the Mariners just start, like, taking pitches. And all of a sudden, it's the 6th inning. And they got to start getting into the bullpen. And you could just feel the momentum shift as Jonathan Hernandez walks 5 guys in 1 inning, you know?
Oh, man. But it'll be an interesting series.
Oh, for sure.
And really, both teams... If both teams split, and they split the next series they have against each other, and
because they can't split this one, it's 3 games, but they can split the next one, which is 4 games.
Right. I think there's a very plausible scenario where the Rangers and the Mariners split against each other, but they do just enough against the A's and the Astros specifically to miracle their way into pushing the Astros out of the playoffs. Of course, depending on what the Blue Jays end up wanting to do as well. But it's a fascinating race.
That's more dependent on the Mariners, because the Mariners will go from 3 games against the Rangers to 3 games against the Astros, which could just bury the Astros, quite frankly, and make the 4-gamer versus the Mariners and the Rangers more of a formality and more of a divisional thing than it is a battle for playoff positioning. So in that way, the Rangers, in terms of wanting security, if they can't significantly crush the Mariners, they kind of need the Mariners to play well against the Astros, because otherwise the Astros are not going away. Because I don't think the Astros are not playing anybody good besides the Mariners. So
yeah, do they have another series against the Royals?
It's something ridiculous like that. They have a very easy schedule to close out, except for this Mariners series, which, considering everyone's half a game out, the Astros are half a game ahead of the Rangers and the Mariners. Whoever comes out of that Rangers-Mariners series, assuming it's a 2-1, they're still going to be within strike. The Mariners will, no matter what, be in striking distance as long as they don't get, like, swept. And that could be used to bury the Astros, because the Rangers get to play the A's. So that... I'm not going to lie, Andrew, that would be a pretty powerful Rangers moment, is to take the Mariners series 2-1, the Mariners get back on track against the Astros, basically crowning the Rangers division winners, and then they get swept by the A's.
They play the Angels. They play the Angels.
Oh, the Angels? Yeah. Still, my point stands. That would be a very Rangers moment to get basically crowned,
it'd be so
and
on
collapse
brand
against the Angels, and then just lose the series, the 4-gamer against the Mariners, and get eliminated.
It would be so on brand, dude. So on brand.
See, the Mariners would be on brand to do just enough to be in there till the last day, and then get eliminated on the last day. That's just very Mariners. So we'll see how it works out. But we're not just talking about baseball, Andrew.
Right.
We're also talking about history and then football. So I'm just going to throw the history out here real quick, because I thought you might get a kick out of some of these, right?
Shoot.
So actually, 9/22, that's the day we're recording. On this day in history, it was Cy Young's 511th and final win of his career in 1911. And on this day in 1969, Willie Mays became the second player to 600 home runs in a career.
Not bad.
There's some real baseball history. Now, In football, you also have another legend, actually. In 2013, the greatest quarterback of all time, Taylor Heinicke, actually broke an NCAA record because he threw for 730 yards in a single game at Old Dominion University.
Yeah, I was about to say, he played at some really small college, right?
So, the next time you hear, like, Cowboys fans hyping up Dak Prescott for passing yards, ask, did he throw for 730 yards? I don't think so. But the one I really wanted to sink my teeth into real quick was actually on the 20th of this week, I believe. It was the Steelers in 1933 played their first game. Andrew, they're running a 1930s offense out here in 2023, I think.
So true. Matt Canada is a fraud. He's been a fraud since he was at LSU in 2017. I still vividly remember this. Gosh, he was...
Reads a scouting report. Fred Warner's the best coverage linebacker in football. I'm going to run crossing patterns directly in front of him all game.
Well,
that's play calling.
The thing is, they would work in theory, but Fred Warner's a freak, and he knows where you're going.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Is Kenny Pickett cooked?
No. He's so young.
He still has more interceptions than touchdowns in his career.
Well, the start of his career had a lot of really fluky interceptions. I think the stat everyone points to is in the first 4 games he threw 8 picks, and then the rest of the way he threw 4. So...
Yeah, but not throwing a lot of touchdowns, is he? To make that, to flip that, is he? I want to tell you something, a little statistic for you.
Yeah?
Not the Rangers. The Steelers had 2 defensive touchdowns in the game they won, and they had 1 offensive touchdown. Their offense has been outscored by their defense this year. Is that true? No, it's not quite true. It's split evenly. It's split evenly because they had 1 touchdown against the Niners. That was offensive, but they have.
It was a T.J. Watt fumble recovery, right?
Was it? I thought it was an offensive touchdown against the Niners.
No, against the Browns.
Against the Browns, it was Watt punched it out. Highsmith returned it.
Okay.
And they also had a pick 6. So they had 2 defensive touchdowns and 1 offensive touchdown, I believe. So the point is, their offense is so bad that their offense has been outscored by the Commanders in like the second half of the game against the Broncos. And I'm not even holding up the Commanders as like a great offense. It's just ridiculous. But speaking of the Commanders, I think it's time to get into our teams, Andrew.
Why don't we start with the Commanders now that we're on the subject?
All right. So first of all, we're the best team in football because Dan Snyder sold. Like, that's just immediately where I'm starting. And here's what I'm going to say.
I'm happy for you, by the way.
Thank you. It's just, I will say that there is more hope surrounding the team. First of all, they sold out the home opener, which was something they haven't done in a long time. So that just, the vibes around the team are a lot better. Talking about the football, they're not bad, and they're better than people getting credit for heading into this year. But are they good? I need to see a little bit more. Because both wins were wins and had a lot of things that you say, okay, that's a really good sign. But they also had some pretty bad trends in there. Starting with game 1 against the Cardinals, it just should not have taken them that long to get going. You know what I mean? The Cardinals are not a good team, though the Giants made them look good. So,
we can get to the Giants later, because that's train wreck.
We'll touch on them. But I think that, honestly, it's like, it makes me shake my head a little bit, because I just think about, for a moment, zooming out, like, if you put this Commanders team in the South in either conference, you know what I mean? They're in a much better spot. The NFC East is kind of stacked this year, and it really hurts the Commanders that they're a team that probably, even if you love Sam Howell, he definitely needs another year of seasoning before he's going to be even an average quarterback at the NFL level. And that's not a luxury the Commanders can afford in terms of trying to compete, which they're not trying to, and I think that's worth keeping in mind. But back to the Cardinals game, the defense looks really good. Yeah, it was against Josh Dobbs, but the Cardinals got a couple early drives. The defense has always looked rusty. One thing of the Jack Del Rio Commanders defenses has been that early in the year, there's a lot of miscommunication. They run a lot of quarters, right? Crossing, a lot of quarters, and when they run zone, They do a lot of handoffs and crossings, and so I think you see early on in the year there's a lot of mix-ups, and so you get these really embarrassing, like, how did they not see that guy? Those generally get cleaned up. Not too worried about that. The defensive line looks really good, which isn't a surprise, but it's a good sign. And at the end of the day, when the team needed to buckle down against the Cardinals, they did. So you don't come away feeling, like, ecstatic, but you feel good about the defense. And then game 2 against the Broncos was kind of the opposite, where the Broncos basically punched them in the mouth. Again, you see this kind of blown assignments deep, hurting them early on in the game. Broncos step out to an early lead. Sam Howell absolutely torches Denver for a huge comeback. And then it was like a fluky Hail Mary that got them within one score, and then they blew the 2-point conversion where there was probably some PI. But, I mean, I know I'm a Commanders fan, but I just can't feel that bad for the Broncos because it's like, you didn't deserve to win that game. You know what I mean?
You're blowing a massive lead to the Commanders,
and you get it back on a tip drill Hail Mary. Like, sorry, I'm not gonna cry for you if Benjamin St. Juste touched Cortland Sutton half a second before the ball got there. Like, back in my day, that's just called good defense. So
true.
Why don't you rub some dirt on it, Cortland Sutton? And why doesn't Russ try and cook by finding a receiver who's actually open? But still, that's kind of one where you're like, okay, not ecstatic about how the defense has played early on, but they've gotten better. Seems to indicate the team is able to make adjustments. Always a good sign. And the offense looks pretty good for what it is. So, where am I right now, Andrew? Cautiously optimistic and very happy with where the team is versus where I thought they were going to be. And I think Sam Howell, with last week's game against the Broncos, has earned the right to say that he needs to be a consideration in future plans. You know what I mean?
I'm pretty close with you.
He's not the...
I'm pretty close with you on this in terms of Commanders in general. Now, I am pretty worried. I'm a little unconvinced that Ron Rivera is the guy here because the defense
players play hard for him.
That's true.
And Bieniemy is a head coach in waiting, which like that I get. You know, you're right, but I'm basically believing and holding on to hope that Rivera is going to retire or step down soon enough, and Bieniemy is just going to step right in.
I would hope so for the Commanders' sake. I think in general this offense is showing a lot of fight and a lot of juice. Brian Robinson, especially, a guy who coming out of college, a lot of people had pegged as a Damian Harris-esque type out of Alabama, who just a solid running back, good power, decent vision, a certified B-level back that people would be fine with. He's shown a lot more juice in his running style over these past 2 weeks. That's really entertaining. Also, he's the guy who started the big hat trend.
I loved that last year. That was so funny.
Which is great. But I will say, I'm enjoying the Sam Howell experience so far. Watching Sam Howell, he's been relatively decisive. He's been making good, solid level throws, a couple of wow throws, especially that 30-yard touchdown to Terry McLaurin, who once again, even as a Cowboys fan, I'll always say
so good.
Terry McLaurin is a top 5 receiver in the NFL, and nobody cares because he's on the Commanders. But
but not for much longer. When we win the Super Bowl with Sam Howell.
Listen, I'm enjoying the Sam Howell experience. In all honesty, watching Sam Howell right now is kind of just evaluating a new quarterback prospect at this point, because in his final year at North Carolina, after guys like Diami Brown and Jahan Dotson actually Dotson went to Penn State, but after guys like Diami Brown, who was his top target in his junior year, and I believe he played his senior year, or if it's 1 year ahead, doesn't matter. But in his final year at UNC, they destroyed the offense. They basically just told him, okay, so you lost your entire offensive line, and instead of making you play like a real quarterback, we're basically just going to ask you to run a whole bunch of QB power and throw screens and RPOs your entire day. Your entire last year. That's going to be your entire year.
The Matt Patricia offense.
You know it.
All screens.
You know it. But it essentially made it to where you couldn't really evaluate Sam Howell in his last year, who coming into the year was projected to be one of the top picks in that draft.
Right.
And essentially that last year killed his draft stock. and I'll be the first to say he should not have fallen into the 5th round. That's ridiculous.
It was a good pick.
He should have been at minimum a mid-second round to early 3rd round pick at the minimum. It's just that quarterback class was so weak that year. But I like what I see from Sam Howell. I want to see him produce for over the next 3 to 4 weeks, and once we get to mid-season, then I think we can make a more concrete evaluation on the type of guy that he's going to be. But so far, I like the athleticism. I like the ability to extend plays. The arm strength is good enough, and he's good enough at reading defenses. So I like where it's going. I'm, like you, cautiously optimistic to see where he's going. But I will say, on the Ron Rivera bit, I'm a little bit worried that these defenses continue to come in with slow starts. Rivera is supposed to be a defensive guy. Now, he's been around since, 2002, so he's got a bit of old man defense there. But this quarter's defense style in the NFL is already starting to die out a little bit. This Fangio-style quarters defense, because it allows pretty much anything underneath and lets you chip away at that defense with crossing routes and comebackers and stuff like that. So when you continue to get torched in the secondary, despite having solid pieces there, I have to question what this defensive scheme really brings to a team that on paper is so incredibly talented. Now, the only thing I will say, the front four are incredible. So,
I mean,
we'll see.
Yeah, you're absolutely right there. There are certainly some scheme questions. In defense of Rivera and his scheme, and Del Rio for that matter, despite the slow starts, the underlying issues have usually been resolved. I mean, at the end of the day, I think Rivera's been here for about 4 years, I think now, and only 1 year was the defense below average. So, yeah, I mean, I can absolutely see where you're coming from, saying, is this scheme maximizing the defense you have? But I'm willing to give them a little bit more run here, considering they've historically started slow, and, that's not a good thing, but the fact of the matter is that the Commanders have had some remarkably good defensive performances late in the year, Now, as to your point about Sam Howell, I mean, yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think with Brock Purdy, especially as sort of to put things in context, I do wonder a little bit about the way people look at, first-round pedigree. You know what I mean? And how if you're a first-rounder, you can just keep getting opportunities. And it's like, I just shake my head when people are like, oh, yeah, what are the Commanders going to do? 2-0, they're not going to be able to get Caleb Williams. I kind of shake my head and I think, well, if Sam Howell had been drafted in the first round, if he had had a better senior year, as you said, right, then we're just evaluating a guy who could be the guy. But because of that draft status, he's not, necessarily considered as much of a guy who could be that guy. So, Bieniemy's a good offensive coordinator. The offense looks way better than it has in years past. And it'll be a huge test here against Buffalo. I don't really expect them to win, but if they can just give them a good game, if that defense can make Josh Allen sweat a little bit, I think Sweat, get it?
Yeah.
Montez Sweat, yeah, there you go. I'm clever too. No, but if they can get to him a little bit, and the offense can hold up some end of its bargain, I think you get a good game and a lot of confidence. And that's where I'm at with the Commanders. Tell me about the Cowboys, Andrew.
Well, other than the really unfortunate news that Trevon Diggs has torn his ACL in practice yesterday, which is rough news, I'm not going to deny that.
It hurts.
He was playing the best ball of his career in his first 2 games, and not for lack of receiver talent on the other sides. Garrett Wilson is, of course, the headliner out of the 2 New York teams that the Cowboys have faced, and he locked him down pretty good. He's been very calculated in the risks he's been taking. As a former receiver himself, he's got amazing hands, so he's got a lot of ball tracking skills. It's the thing that you love about Trevon Diggs, and he's been playing great, and he tore his ACL, which is a massive bummer. So
He's done.
We're looking at, right now for the Cowboys, Deron Bland, a late-round rookie last year who played really well in the slot. It looks like they're gonna kick him out to outside, and they're gonna bring Jordan Lewis back into the slot, who's historically been pretty solid out of the slot, but nothing too special. But it hurts. It hurts because at least Stephon Gilmore's still here, but that was the main piece of the secondary that is going away now. So
yeah,
we'll have to see what the secondary looks like over the next couple of weeks. We'll see if Jerry Jones tries to make some sort of move for another corner. I expect them to do so at some point. But removing the Trevon Diggs situation from the rest of this 2-week performance, the Cowboys have been incredible. There's no other way to put it. It's a defensively minded team right now first. And of course that Giants game, yeah, sure it was raining a little bit, but you don't produce that much pressure just because it's raining in those first 2 games. As of right now, Micah Parsons is the top-rated edge rusher per PFF right now, period. He has been incredible. And I think it's worth noting, as a general football fan base, and for me personally, there's been very few players in the league to where you watch them play and you recognize instantly, not only is this special, but this is an all-time great kind of special. I've only gotten it a couple of times. I saw it with Aaron Donald a couple of years ago. He's a bit older now, but he's still very good. 2016 with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, another one.
Sam Howell.
Of course. Who could deny that?
Especially that last game, Week 18 against the Cowboys. I mean, he's just him.
But
no, but I agree with you. Like Micah Parsons has been so good, just their entire career.
I've never seen an edge rusher like this.
He's basically like the next Lawrence Taylor. That's the best way I can think of it.
You don't get players that are faster than most linebackers, because people forget he came out as a linebacker out of Penn State. Yeah. You don't get edge rushers that are faster than most linebackers, stronger and quicker than most edge rushers, and he was still really new to the position. He just started learning pass rush moves because he had a bull rush last year. He had a fine cross chop, but he was still really raw in his technique. He's bringing that technique over now. And not only that, but they can move him anywhere on the line. They can line him up over the center like they did against the Jets, and he just gets instant pressure in that one-on-one matchup. They can bring him in on a stunt, which is something that Dan Quinn loves to do, and loop him around the defensive tackle and go attack the A or B gap. He is a Swiss Army knife, but every blade of that knife is a gun. He's been great. He's been great, and watching him play in his prime is honestly a pleasure. And not to discredit the rest of the line, because the rest of the line has been playing really amazing as well. We got DeMarcus Lawrence, who looks like he's back to his 2019 form, which is incredible. Osa Odighizuwa and Mozzie Smith, who have been great in the interior line. And this isn't even the Cowboys' defense at its full strength. Sam Williams, who is a rotational edge rusher from last year, he hasn't even been on the field. Super explosive guy. And this defense is easily, I think, the best in the league. I think they've surpassed the Niners in that sense. And this offense really hasn't had to do much, Harry.
Yeah. That's... Andrew, you know me. I'm a bit of a Cowboys hater.
I'm aware.
And the defense, I've actually really enjoyed, ever since Micah Parsons has joined the team, I've enjoyed watching the Cowboys defense. I'm a defense-first guy, and while I'm no Cowboys fan, you can't like defense and not enjoy watching Micah Parsons play the game of football. that was really funny for that earlier stretch. Was it last year where they wanted to like put him in coverage and they wouldn't use him as a pass rusher? Do you remember when they were doing that?
They were still
for
doing
like the first couple games.
Yeah, they were still doing the tweener thing in the first half. It was
so funny. But yeah, I mean, that being said, I'm gonna say where I had them heading into the year, I think I was too low on them. You know, I think they're better. They've earned their place in the contender status going off of 2 games. Let's see it over maybe half a season, and let's see it against a real quarterback. I mean, I'm sorry, but, like, yes, the pressure's always going to get there, right? And that defense is real, and I don't doubt that. But the defense is not going to be able to give Dak Prescott essentially the baby treatment every week. You know what I mean? It's not just going to be Danny Dimes and Zach Wilson. They're going to have to play the Sam Howells. No, I'm kidding. Not the Sam Howells. No, but seriously, like, if you want to beat really good teams with really good quarterbacks, I want to see this defense, and especially I want to see this offense prove that if the defense stumbles, it can be there. But you're right. I mean, they look really good.
And the offense has been fine. They've been fine.
Okay, yeah.
They were okay in the Giants game where it was raining really hard and they basically just ran the ball the whole time. But in the Jets game, Dak Prescott made a couple of really nice throws down the sideline. But other than that, he just showed off that, once again, he's really good at...
Learned his lesson? You're not going to just throw a bajillion picks?
Yeah, I will. He did have one dropped pick from Sauce Gardner. I saw that. That was really the only rough throw of the night. But other than that, he's been very quick in his decision making, accurate, on time, and been able to just flip the ball to his receivers and let them make plays. He hasn't been asked to do all that much, and he's been good so far. So
yeah,
Dak is looking back to his old self, which is good to see. And CeeDee Lamb is great, but we'll have to see what this offense can do against another team that is actually putting pressure on them offensively, where they actually have to go out and score and not just let the defense run wild. Because even though the Jets' defense is really good, they weren't pressured.
There was no threat.
Yeah, no.
There was no threat. I mean, you mentioned that, and I think you're right. Without being unduly harsh, I think we're seeing the best situation possible for Dak Prescott, where, like, last year, he was being asked to be that guy, that kind of quarterback. You know what I mean? And he isn't, and he threw a ton of picks. And I think you're right that if he could take a step back, if there isn't as much pressure, and he's just there to, I don't want to say check boxes. He's not a game manager, but he's clearly not that, like, Mahomes.
He's a point guard. He plays like a point guard style.
Exactly. And he's not just, I guess I'd say, like, he's not a Steph Curry, right? He's just a competent point guard. You know what I mean? Maybe even an above-average one. You might see him make the All-Star game every couple of years. You see him make a really flashy pass. You're like, oh, yeah, he's pretty good. But he's not the kind of guy who you could just say, you give me the ball, I'm going to give you the ball, score me some points. And I think he made a lot of mistakes forcing a lot last year. And to be honest, I'm much more scared of the Cowboys the more they take the ball out of his hands in big moments.
I will note that I think last year was an exception to the rule. Dak Prescott historically has been a really solid quarterback who's been very accurate and very good at reading defenses. I think last year was a bit of an anomaly with all the picks that he threw him. So I will say, I think Dak is just regressing to the mean here and looking comfortable again with some more traditional West Coast style concepts here from Mike McCarthy instead of the more spread style stuff from Kellen Moore, who, by the way, I still would have preferred Kellen Moore be the offensive coordinator here, but the Texas Coast offense has looked fine so far. So we'll see what it's at. They definitely won't be tested this week because they play the Cardinals, who are tanking. And we can have a Kyler Murray discussion on another day. I think Kyler's still really good, but
maybe in recapping for next week.
Yeah, for next week.
About. Yeah, exactly. I mean, after my Commanders blow out the Bills, I'm going to be feeling pretty good. So,
I'm sure.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
No. Well, my expectations are reasonable. For all my jokes, I don't think we're going to beat the Bills. I just hope we give them a game. But yeah, Andrew, you got anything else on the Cowboys?
I think that's the only thing I'll note is that the offense isn't at full strength either. Tyler Smith hasn't played yet because he's been dealing with an injury from the last week of camp that's been keeping him out his first 2 games, and same goes for Brandon Cooks, who was one of the big additions to the offense this offseason. So we'll see what the offense looks like when it's at full strength. But other than that, that's about it.
Alrighty. Well then, folks, you heard it here. The Rangers and the Mariners are at each other's throats in the most exciting divisional race of our lives. And the Commanders are better than we thought they were, and so are the Cowboys, though I think our expectations were very far apart, so that's not quite, I don't want to draw an equivalence there. Still, I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen. Hope you come back next week for our next show, and it's been a pleasure. Alright.
Okay.
Now, Andrew, I'm going to stop my recording, and I'm going to send it to you before my laptop